It was like a war zone.
So all of a sudden, there were so many patients. Everybody needed medications. Everybody needed treatment.
Those are nurses who worked at the nursing home in Kirkland, Washington. That's where 35 seniors died from coronavirus at the start of this outbreak. Since then, we've seen horror stories from many other facilities. In Andover, New Jersey, 70 residents of a nursing home died, and the tragedy was only uncovered after an anonymous tip about a body bag in a shed was called into police. When the police arrived, they discovered more than a dozen other bodies packed into a small morgue intended to hold 4 bodies. And now some relatives who lost loved ones at Andover are speaking out. Several people saying they received form letters notifying that their relative had tested positive. One person saying they got the letter to tell them that the resident had died. One woman telling the local paper, quote, "I'm concerned my uncle had no oxygen, suffocated and died alone. No one should have to die alone." Andover and Kirkland are far from alone, though. At a nursing home in Brooklyn, 55 residents have died. In fact, at least 42 nursing homes in New York State have had more than 10 deaths. And at the Windsor nursing home in Connecticut, 35 people have died. In Philadelphia, more than half of the city's COVID deaths have occurred at nursing homes. And the list, it goes on and on. We are seeing similar things playing out at facilities from coast to coast. And many of the homes, they're complaining of shortages of gear as well as staff. Take a listen to the CEO of River Spring Health, owner of a home in the Bronx.
The challenges we're facing are multifaceted. They have to do with shortages of staff, shortages of equipment, and cash flow because of all the things that we need to get on hand.
On the other side, scores of family members are complaining of a lack of information, chaotic conditions, and more. My next guest has been following this story, I should say, closely. Tiffany Cusaac-Smith. She's a reporter at LOHUD, which is part of the USA Today family of newspapers. And the Gannett folks have really been covering this story in depth. Tiffany, thanks for the time. I appreciate it.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Would you say from the families you've spoken to, they are more frustrated over the lack of transparency of what's going on in the homes that have their loved ones there, or are they more scared about the conditions their loved ones are living in?
I would say that they are concerned about both. That they are concerned that they're not hearing enough communication about about how their loved one is doing, about how many coronavirus cases that are happening at these facilities, and deaths. But there has been some updates. You know, the governor has passed, some an executive order ordering, a number of nursing home facilities to let patients know. But I'm not sure how much that is trickling down. And as the governor has said, we only know as much as people tell us. So it's, it's for them, it's a fear, that, their loved one could be next, or, if there's any way to prevent it, they want to know that.
Tiffany, today at Governor Cuomos' presser, he said at one point, hey, if you're thinking about putting a loved one in a nursing home, if you can afford not to, I wouldn't do it, which I thought was staggering coming from the governor. And then he made it clear that unlike the hospitals, these nursing homes are private institutions, and they're basically, as I said, for the most part, for-profit enterprises, businesses. Take a listen.
I know there's a thought a nursing home is run by the state. It's a wrong thought, facts. The private entity runs it. We regulate the private entity. If the private entity is not performing their duty as they should be, then the state takes action versus the private entity. You can lose your license. You'll be out of business. If you're not providing your staff with the right equipment, you're out of business. That we can do.
I don't know, Tiffany, I was a little surprised, and I thought the governor has handled this crisis exceedingly well. I'm obviously not alone there, but when it comes to nursing homes, I don't know if it's a blind spot, but this idea that, hey, we'll look after you if you come to a hospital, but if you're in a nursing home, look to them. Have you found there's a little bit of a political hot potato here as to who's taking care of these? You don't care at the end of the day if it's your mother or your father in there. You just want somebody to be looking out for them.
Right. I would say that there is somewhat of a political hot potato as to, who's has the most accountability. A lot of these patients, they they look to the state, the county, their county governments, and then they go to the state and ask them, what can be done. But as you've shown there, there's only so much that the New York State government can do for these facilities. And I think that it goes back to, I interviewed one man's family, and his mother actually his family actually took him out of the facility because they were so concerned about the spread of coronavirus, and they weren't getting answers from anybody at those facilities. So I think it is, somewhat of a hot potato, and these facilities are facing nursing home shortages, just as the hospital has. They're also burning through PPE, at personal protective gear, at a very quick pace. And, they're not getting as much of the assistance because, they are these private entities. So I definitely could see how, the governor would give that advice to families at this moment.
Do they have what they need? Do they have enough people? Do they have enough PPE? I remember at the Cabrini home, they were saying that, they showed pictures of, some of the nurses that literally had garbage bags on. They said that was only one day. What are you hearing? Because you're closer to this.
Well, what I'm hearing is that, the facilities are pretty open. The facilities I've spoken with are pretty open with, the fact that they are running out of PPE very quickly, and that, they need more than ever. In one case, I believe a facility in White Plains, they were able to get a number of, residents' families to donate gear to them. And then another facility, they got 5,000 masks from a bank in China. So they're running out of PPE, and also something that I've heard is that staff is concerned about the lack of PPE, because a lot of this gear is only supposed to be used for maybe a couple hours, and now they're having to reuse it. So it is a problem, and a probable contributor to the spread of coronavirus at those facilities.
Other states have chosen to deal with this differently. I know out west, I think it's in Oregon, they make sure there's an epidemiologist on staff, and they try and they also have state troopers there, somebody looking out that the care for the patients at least gets reported if it's not at the level it should be. Are you comfortable now that if they don't have the right gear, if they don't have enough staff, that the families are going to know about it? Or are we still in the dark here a little bit, and we're trusting that the nursing home will self-report?
I think, we might still be in the dark with this, what's happening at these nursing home facilities, because, the governor's passed, this executive order, the AARP has urged, more, open communication about what's happening. But a lot of that is based off what's self-reported, what, these nursing home facilities decide to, tell them. So we only know as much as, we know, to quote Governor Cuomo again. So it's possible, that can happen, yes. And
of course, it's further complicated because, and for understandable reason, there's no more visitors anymore. And the lifelines for so many of these seniors was their families would come visit them. They can't do that anymore, so they're completely isolated. Finally, put a human face on this, because of the families you spoke to, Patricia Barry and her family really stood out to you. Tell us about her story and her family.
Well, Patricia, she was in her 60s, and she unfortunately died recently. Her family has been battling for her death to be considered a coronavirus death. It's been listed as something else. Her family wants. I talked to her brother, and I also talked to her sister. And a point of the interview was when her sister had been in Tower 1 during 9/11, and she remembers how the people who were, killed during, 9/11 were memorialized and were honored. And she said something to the fact of, you don't get to choose your battle, and they didn't get to choose her battle. And she believes her sister didn't get to choose her battle, but that they deserve to be counted among the ranks. And I think that, to me, that was very touching, and it spoke to, a lot of, the concerns that people have, but also, the lack of what we don't know as well. We don't know. We're not able to confirm every case. There is, some room for more transparency as well.
Tiffany Cusaac-Smith, I appreciate a few minutes tonight. Thank you so much.
No problem.
All right, everyone, when we come back, a dreamer who's also an essential worker in the fight against COVID. She'll join us to discuss her work on the front lines, but also the uncertainty she faces as the Trump administration clamps down on immigrants.